Hi, my name is Susan Lukas. I'm with the Reserve Officer Association, and I wanted to share with you a meeting that we just had with the House Veteran Affairs Committee. They held a roundtable, allowed ROA to come and sit at the table and share some of their thoughts on the Mission Act that just passed, and also it gave us an opportunity to identify some other problems that we have been running into between the Veterans Administration or Veterans Affairs and DOD. That meeting was held on 25 July in the Capitol Visitor Center, and it ended up having about 6 or 7 members that ended up coming, so we were able to get to quite a few people that would potentially sponsor bills or help us change some policies as it relates to Guard and Reserve. The first discussion was on the Mission Act, which just passed. The Mission Act was passed to replace the Choice Act, and the Choice Act was put in place when VA found out that their scheduling was not allowing them to get individuals in, and they were having to wait 30, 60, 180 days for appointments. So what Congress did is they passed the Choice Act so that individuals could be referred out to the community to other healthcare providers when an appointment could not be put or completed within VA in 30 days or less. That ended up costing, I think, more than everybody thought it did, in part because once it did pass, you had more veterans start to come into the system because they saw that they'd be able to actually get their medical issues taken care of. So over time, Congress worked out the idiosyncrasies or the eccentricities of the law to try to smooth things out, because it did pass in a very short time. They put more money to it, but then I think it just got to a point where they said, hey, wait a minute, let's kind of step back. Let's take a fresh look at it, look at lessons learned, and then how can we improve it. So the Mission Act passed. Probably the biggest issue right now is it's not fully funded. So what will happen with that is VA and the government will end up having to figure out if they're going to proceed with the Mission Act, how they're going to pay for those appointments. When we looked at the act, and first I should say ROA was brought in at the beginning of when the act was being written by House. House Chairman Rowe let us come in and have our say, and we did have quite a few provisions or sections in there that we made recommendations to, and they were very appreciative of what we brought up, and in many instances, or as best as we can tell, almost all of them were taken into consideration and addressed in one way or the other. We did see, though, that in the final act on Section 121, Education Program on Healthcare Options, what we told the members that were assembled is that as we're educating veterans on the healthcare policies, that they needed to include the Department of Defense and Medicaid and Medicare services. And the reason is because you will have a veteran who qualifies for more than one program, which can include TRICARE and VA. And so members need to understand that when they are using one type of insurance, which is normally considered the primary, they need to understand how the secondary and even maybe tertiary programs may play into that service that's being done. So we felt it should be a comprehensive multi-agency approach on this education, so that we don't have, say, somebody in VA who thinks they understand TRICARE, explain TRICARE, or somebody from TRICARE who thinks they understand VA, explain VA. So bring in the experts and let's get a good education program going on. And then one other step that we recommended is once they develop the education programs, they run them through the veteran and military service organizations, because we are the ones who work more directly with you, and so I think we have a better sense of whether or not the education programs they put together are going to make any sense when they start, executing and playing out in the real world. So once we discussed various aspects of the Mission Act, we were able to get into some of our other issues. And this is an issue that came up probably from many sources. We have members who've called in about problems that they've had. we had an amendment that just passed. And what we're seeing is that there are policies and legislation being put through on veterans, but it is inadvertently, and we're accepting that it's inadvertent and not meant, to be that way. But we feel that Guard and Reserve are sometimes left off or are not included as an audience or stakeholder that needs to be considered when the language is being written. And in particular, an amendment was passed that directed a study, and it did not include the Guard and Reserve. And what was really kind of funny in it is that the whole reason they were doing it was to fix a problem, but it was the Guard and Reserve who had the most problem. So to us, the very stakeholders who should have been involved were not. We contacted that office, the representative office, and they were more than willing to do it, and actually felt bad that they had not included the Guard and Reserve because they thought they did based on the language. So I think that that's something ROA will be working on more and more, is just trying to get out there to the members' offices and the committees how to write the language so that it does include the Guard and Reserve. So based on this trend that we're seeing, what we've done now is we went to House Veteran Affairs, Senate Veteran Affairs, and then even yesterday we went to DOD Reserve Forces Policy Board. And what we're asking is that VA and DOD either have a standing committee on the Guard and Reserve, or they put it as a subcommittee to an executive group that they do. And this committee would be in place to always be consulted on legislation and policies that they're doing, but also be able to just get in on the discussion on the beginning of some of these things, like when a law goes through, how's it going to execute? Well, how it executes for active duty is not always how it needs to be executed for Guard and Reserve. So we are really pushing as we go into the 116th for this group to be put together. Now, my boss, when I was explaining it to my executive director, he said, that's fine and good. We don't want to just be focused on benefits, and we aren't, because as a national charter, we do national defense. And so what I explained is we had run into a problem where individuals in the Guard and Reserve were being treated at VA for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or there are many references to it, but problems from coming out of service. And the treatment was being given to Guard and Active. It was a perfectly acceptable medical approach to the issue. It was successful. Things were going fine. The problem was Guard and Reserve were still participating reservists. So as they were coming back into their participating status, and it was identified that they got this treatment, they were then put into a non-mobilization or non-deployable status because that treatment was not acceptable, whereas active duty, who had the same treatment, they were kept in the same participating status. So even though we think sometimes something is always going to be from a benefit approach, we often find that it also affects the Guard and Reserve members' ability to perform their strategic or operational reserve role. So you'll see us do more with Veterans Organization, Veterans Affairs, and the two committees. Many times it will be benefit, but often it'll also be just the fact or the ability for Guard and Reserve to do their job. I'm going to start trying to do more series of these, explaining the laws that are going on, and then also explaining aspects of legislation and how that is working, and the processes that we go through, and then also how you as a member can also interact from your side, the grassroots. Thank you, and we'll be seeing you in further podcasts.